What's up, everybody? We've got our first Marvel show of the year to talk about, and it's Echo, which also turns out to be the first Marvel Spotlight project. A step into maturity for the MCU that was fresh and exciting, since we really don't get it here in the MCU, especially to this extent. There will be plenty of spoilers, of course, spread throughout this review as I go through each episode. That's the 5 episodes this season here. So, you've been warned if you haven't seen this show yet. And with that out of the way, let's get into the show. I'm going to start with the first episode here, then I'll kind of go through each and every individual episode with a breakdown and then a little review after, and then I'll wrap it up at the end of the video with my final thoughts on the show. So, the first episode begins with a flashback, like they all do actually, that goes way back in time to like the origins of Echo's powers, I guess you could say. And the first to get them was a woman named Shafa who saved her family from a collapsing cave. Through this episode, we sort of move through time as we move through the episode. Obviously, a real big jump from that flashback with Shafa to when Echo's a child, but you get the point. We move through time and Echo gets older as the episode goes on. After that opening scene, we do see the car crash that took Maya's leg, but also her mom and her cousin. I want to say it's cousin. It might have been sister. They have that back and forth about how they're related. I think it was cousin. I want to say it was cousin. I'm 99% sure it's cousin. That 1% is me rambling right now, though. Anyway, after that crash, her and her father moved to New York, which leads us to some of the stuff we saw in that Hawkeye series. And then sometime after that, she gets arrested as she's trying to steal a motorcycle, and Kingpin gets her out of it and takes her under his wing. Then she gets her first job, and well, Daredevil shows up just after they take down all the thugs, and her fight with him was so cool. And I love this more agile and acrobatic Daredevil we're getting in the MCU. I cannot wait for Daredevil Born Again. After that, we kind of get the rest of her Hawkeye stuff with her finding about who Kingpin is really, and the end of the show where she shoots him in the eye, but obviously he's not dead, he's back. Then we go to present day, which is 5 months after the events of Hawkeye, and she's on the road heading back home to find herself after everything that went down in Hawkeye as the episode closes with a shot of Kingpin in the hospital. This was a very average first episode here, especially considering this was only a 5 episode series, and we really don't get much of this show's story here in this episode. It's more of a full episode of groundwork that's already been done being recapped because people don't watch all the shows. So, as someone who watched Hawkeye, this got a bit annoying for me personally, considering I think it was also the longest episode out of the 5. That also spiraled into an episode with pacing that left me with whiplash because of how fast they ran through this stuff. Like, it didn't really make sense because you already did all of this, and then you're taking it, you're stretching it out, adding some scenes in, adding some new stuff in too, like completely unconnected, but then you're jumping around from everything, and it's just all I did not really didn't like the structure of this episode. I did like parts of the story, but the structure not so much. And the flashbacks and rehash footage consume almost the whole episode. I mean, that's almost 20% of the show without developing the show's story in a significant way. But it's not all doom and gloom. I did like the Native American cultural elements in the show, but I specifically really remember liking them in this first episode. And my favorite part had to be the action. I mean, it was just so damn cool. That Daredevil fight, it was quick, it was epic, but it was amazing. The length of a fight does not always tell you how good it's going to be, because this one is one of my favorites in the MCU. The fight that preceded that one, also really cool. The choreography in this show overall was just pretty damn good all the way through. Moving on to episode 2 now, where we started with a flashback to the year 1200 AD. It was a cool flashback where they're kind of playing Choctaw stickball, which is also called Ishtaboli, and it's a pretty cool game that I definitely didn't have to Google to figure out what it was. Back in the present, we get to that awesome train sequence we saw a little bit of before the show, and it was really cool. And at the end, Maya's powers kind of start to come in for the first time. But those powers aren't the problem yet. Right now, she's starting a whole lot of problems, like planting explosives on that train that's going to one of Kingpin's warehouses, and, well, she's about to bring all those problems right back to her town, and so Henry has to tell her that she's acting as Kingpin would to try and stop this runaway train. This episode struggled with the pacing just like the first did, as the show's story slowly started to roll out here. Along with that came a little more emotion too, which was something I did think was lacking in that first episode. But the action was awesome once again. I mean, I'm going to be talking about it after every single episode because it was just that good throughout almost the entire show. Also, this guy Biscuits, love him. Makes this show 30 times better, and he's absolutely hilarious, and he's like easily that one character, that one side character who just becomes a favorite for no good reason, just because he's a goof. He's just a goof, and I love him. Now let's get on to that third episode of the show. This one got kicked off with a flashback to the late 1800s, where we see Tuklo and some of her story, which was pretty cool. Then Maya and Bonnie are taken for Zane, who works for Kingpin, by some goons where the roller rink fight from the trailers breaks out. This wasn't quite as cool as the Daredevil fight, but it was still really cool because once the goons win, Zane's phone rings and he's called off. After that, Maya gets her new leg piece from Sully, and it's not simple enough for her, but after Sully lays out his reasoning, she accepts it to represent her people. She heads back home seemingly unsure if she'll stay there or hit the road again, but she doesn't have much choice once she gets there as Kingpin is waiting. This was my second favorite episode out of the five. Both the story and the emotion behind the show, specifically the present day chunk of stuff, though, really started to come through here in this episode, and Alekwa Cox had her best performance as Echo, in my opinion. Then, same as the first two episodes, the fight scenes in here, awesome. I love that sequence of her charging the goon through the wall of the rink, especially because Dragula was playing through it, and it's the year of Dragula, folks. Get used to it. And before we move on to the final two episodes of the show, I just wanted to say if you're enjoying this breakdown so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel to show some support in the freest and easiest way possible. I truly appreciate it greatly, and it really does help out the channel. So I hope to see you around the Nerdverse in the future. Alright, let's get back to the show now with episode 4. This episode opens with my second favorite scene of the whole show, which takes place back in New York, 2008, where Kingpin lays into that ice cream man after he disrespects a young Maya. Peak, just peak. I love Kingpin. Anyway, we then jump to 2021, and I think we saw this scene in episode 1 after she got arrested, but Maya and Kingpin are having dinner together. He kills her tutor, and then he promotes her. In the present, we pick up right where the third episode left off with Kingpin and Maya standing not 20 feet apart, but then it turns out he came in peace, or Kingpin's version of peace, starting with the contact lenses that translate his words to ASL for Maya, and then later Echo reconnects with her grandma to learn more about her powers after another episode, and now and I don't mean like episode like to the show. I mean like episode like she starts seeing all this stuff and everything. Uh, but I'm not super familiar with Echo at all. Like I've read one Daredevil run she was in, so I'm not certain how her powers work in the comics or how accurately they were brought to the MCU. But my understanding here is they've been passed through her family by Chafa, who started it, and they're badass. After a conversation with Chula doesn't end well, she heads to the casino where Kingpin told her he'd be waiting and he wants her to come back to New York. He even offers her own empire if she wants, but she won't go with him. This was my favorite episode, no doubt about it. Everything picked up, specifically the performances, though. They weren't bad through the first three. I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that, but they took that next step I was waiting for here, and I'd say it got a lot better too due to Vincent D'Onofrio stepping into the present day story as well. The dynamic between Maya and Fisk is just so damn good, and both of them deserve all the praise for absolutely bringing it in this series. The story itself also picked up because since we're so deep, these openings that would slightly matter for their episode are now beginning to matter a whole lot more as Maya finds herself. I also just love the way her powers are shaping up. Like I said, not super familiar with them, so her comic fans, you might be mad. I'm not sure. I don't know. But this show's going to have me looking for her comics, or at least one she's in, to read so I can figure out what her powers are like because they're so cool. So if you've read, Daredevil runs, her own runs that are really cool, drop me some recommendations down in the comments below. Now, let's move on to the fifth and final episode of this miniseries. It opened with a flashback of a young Echo with her mother as she slingshots a bird to see if she can hit it, and she does. Then her mom uses their powers they have to heal the bird. In the present, Maya's left Tamaha once again as she stops at a Roxxon gas station, and Roxanne's been sprinkled throughout the MCU, and I'm still kind of just waiting to see if they'll ever have a prominent role in the universe. But she goes back home again, having not gotten very far, and heads for her grandma's where she finds her mom. I think this was definitely like a Force Ghost situation related to her family's powers, to put it into nerdy terms. But no, I don't believe her mom was actually in that room. After that, she heads to the Choctaw Nation powwow. Such a cool name for a big carnival, by the way. But there's some unwanted guests that will be joining the visitors at the carnival. They took her grandma and Bonnie. Poor Bonnie getting taken twice in 2 episodes. But Maya gets to them, and she actually transfers her powers, or maybe unlocks theirs since they're family. And they take down Kingpin's goons, and Echo takes Kingpin back to what I'm assuming was the day he killed his father because he's got the hammer in his room. And she's trying to just, help Fisk cope with his past, and he freaks out afterward, having to leave Tamaha without Maya as the police arrive at the scene. Then we get the mid-credit scene that leads us into Daredevil Born Again as Kingpin listens to the news on his plane and gets an idea. Wouldn't it be cool to be mayor of New York? I thought this was an okay finale. It did its job, it wrapped up the show's story, shaped Echo to be a new person in the future, and featured a couple other MCU teases like the credit scene and some Easter eggs in there like the Roxxon gas stations. The fights also weren't as good in this episode as they were in the first four, if you ask me. And I don't, I don't even know if I'd say I liked them, which is a harsh drop from the first 4 episodes of me praising them out of my ass. Uh, to now, I'm not even sure if I liked them. I I don't know. I'm just gonna leave it at that. The first four had phenomenal action sequences. This one didn't live up to that level. However, the emotional weight was finally fully out, and I loved it. It's a combination of an intriguing story and outstanding performances from Alekwa Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio as they helped to propel this episode to being better than I guarantee you it was on paper. Overall, it was a solid show. I did think the story was pretty weak at the end of the day, but I can't consciously blame the creatives behind it, knowing how much the show got reworked. I mean, 8 episodes down to 6, down to 5 with an all at once release is crazy. I mean, listen, I've never made a TV show, but I'd imagine that's a pretty damn stressful situation to be in. Another problem is the supporting characters, not the supporting cast, the supporting characters not being very interesting. I think once again, that blame kind of lands on the extensive reworking this show went through. A lot of those scenes in Tomahawk feel like they have a massive chunk taken out of them, and I don't know, I don't know this for sure. I'm just making an assumption here, but I do think that's the reason these characters feel so underdeveloped and, almost NPC like. I also thought the flashbacks, both Echo's life and the ones with her ancestors, were better than the stuff we were getting in the present day in the show. I don't know if that's necessarily an issue with the show, but it's something that kind of stood out and bugged me all season. But I don't want to be all down on the show because it really was a good show. A big part of that is thanks to those awesome action sequences. Not sure I mentioned them yet. That just blew me away. It was like, oh, this is a big bar, but I'm going to say it. It was like the closest they've gotten to that Winter Soldier action that I love so much. Another thing, I did mention this before too, but I just want to acknowledge again the performances in the series all the way through. It's not just Alekwa and Vincent, it's such a unique character and world to be in, and this entire cast stepped up to the table and went 100% all in. I thought it was so cool that most, probably all of them to be quite honest, but not all of them use it like fully on screen. It's cool that most of them, if not all, learned and used ASL with Alekwa and Echo, and her performance was just outstanding. But as his name says, Kingpin is taking the crown as Vincent D'Onofrio. Absolutely, no doubt about it. 1000% day and night stole the show. And so that'll do it for my review of the first Spotlight show in the MCU, Echo. The series is going to land at a 7 out of 10 for me personally, as it definitely had its ups and downs, but still a solid show. Make sure you let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below, and make sure you have a great day.